review of a fantasy book in a long time. At least I think it has. It is. This was one I had never heard of. This is called The Absolute Book by Elizabeth Knox. And it is a book that's written in several sections. That's why it's so long. It was really interesting and a little confusing at times. So the book starts with our main character, Taryn. I don't know if I'm saying her name right or not. I don't know if that's how the author meant for you to say her name, but that's how I'm going to say it. You find out that a long time ago, her sister, who was holding a book, was murdered. And Taryn wanted to get revenge for the person who did it. And someone does get arrested, and she decides to hire someone to go after him so she doesn't get convicted for murdering her sister. And you find out that her sister's murder is connected to the knowledge of finding this, I don't know if it's a person or an object. That's part of what is confusing, is something known as the fire starter. And that is something that her grandfather had. I think it was an object. Something that her grandfather had. And so, years later, she has walked away from her revenge plans and has tried to move on from her life. But this creature that's half human, I can't remember I don't remember if he's half fairy or half human, but I know he's human, half human at least. He shows up in her life. He's a shapeshifter, and they call him Shift. And he tells her about what's that they are finding. They're trying to find the fire starter, and that her grandfather was the last person who had it. And so he takes her on this mission. And meanwhile, she's also being hunted down by the very man that she hired to kill the person who killed her sister. And he wants to punish her because he got punished. And meanwhile, she's also the cops are investigating her because they suspect that she knows more about what happened to the guy that killed her sister, and why he got murdered in the prison. And this journalist also follows her and is asked to investigate. I don't remember if he was a journalist or or like a detective or whatever, but he comes along to find her, and he's chased her down as well, and they end up running into each other and become allies in this whole situation. He offers to help her out in this, and they end up having to go into the world, Shift's world, where it turns out that it's a fairy world, and the fairies don't like Shift because he's not full-on fairy, full-on fae. They don't trust him, but he needs to protect and escort Taryn across this world, because not only is she being hunted down, and the guy, but also she has a demon that has attached himself to her, hoping to get some, go after the fae, and hoping because of her relationship to Shift that they can get to the fae through her. Something like that. And I know that's very confusing. I'm not even 100% if I'm remembering it all correctly, but because it's been a few weeks. So this world was very intriguing. It's very interesting, this fairy world. It's a little different than, what I had been reading the last 5 years. Like, it's definitely not exactly like Sarah J. Maas's version of the fae. Probably a lot closer to the original Celtic mythology. It's a very weird world, but there's also a mix of Christian mythology and Norse mythology into the story. Like, we meet Odin in the story, and through her, and we also meet his two ravens, Hugin and Munin. I don't know how to say that. I just heard from another show, actually from the show So Weird, because there's a show where they're dealing with a troll. Like, in case you don't know, it's a really cool show that was in the early 2000s. It was on Disney. It was during that whole transition period in Disney where they didn't know what kind of show channel they wanted to be. And it's this girl who is connected to the spirit mythical world, and she's trying to find out what happened to her dad because something happened to her dad, and they keep encountering weird magical stuff, and at one point they end up crossing paths with a troll who turns humans into vegetables. And trolls like to ask questions, and they ask, and a friend of their family has a thing as Viking history. So he ends up, the troll asks what he knows about Viking lore. And they mentioned about Odin and his two. And so that show references, now I don't remember what they said. But like I said, Hugin, I think, was how they pronounced one of them. And anyway, so there's also a subplot where she has a very complicated relationship with her dad, who's a famous actor. Her mom died, and so it's just her and her dad, and who's now remarried. So she doesn't have the greatest relationship with her dad. So that's kind of that's a subplot. It's a very intriguing. Like, I really enjoy this world and trying to figure it all out and trying to understand it. It's very mythical. I mean, there's at one point where the journalist, whose name escapes me, he is put under the influence of another fae who was dating Shift at one point, like a kind of like a spell. So he feels completely the human feels devoted in love with this fae. Who's, like I said, I don't remember a lot of these names. I do not remember. And there's also this thing with this glove that can open portals into other worlds, and that's the demons want that. And so it was really cool, but I can admit it was a little confusing at times. It's like I guess it might not have been the best thing to get back into fantasy with. But it had really cool concepts. Like I said, it has a mix of all these different mythologies, if you're interested in that. But there's also a thriller element to it, because the cops are after Taryn, and there's this other guy that's after Taryn that's, she hired him to kill the person who killed her sister. The Mole Skinner. She calls him the Mole Skinner. And he puts their lives in danger. He tries to go after Taryn and the guy, the journalist, and tries to kill them to get revenge. And it's a very intense and whimsical story. And I really like how included all these different mythologies, like Norse mythology, and referencing that. And it was really cool to be able to have some idea of what they were talking about, of the mythology and everything, because of course I know a very little bit. Like, mostly, because I watched the Marvel movies, and so the Thor storyline, and then that kind of led me down a rabbit hole a little bit. So I know some of the Norse mythology, not a lot, but enough to be able to follow along with that and know what they were referencing. I do like, because at first I thought they were going the direction of Taryn and the journalist being a couple, but they kind of don't. They just become friends, and even then their friendship is tested a little bit at one point, because he feels, she has put him in too much danger, and like, she has sacrificed him for herself. And he's a little angry about that. He gets a little angry about that at one point. And that's why he ends up being easily manipulated by the Fae who puts him under the spell. And, so I thought they were going in the direction of them being a couple, but they don't. I mean, there's very little romance in the story, which I actually appreciate. They're, like, just kind of, it was a reprieve from that. I mean, I like romance as much as the next, not the genre as much, but I do root for romance in these fantasy stories, but if it's not in there, that's actually, can be kind of nice at times. A nice reprieve when it's more focused on the destiny and the mission of the characters and what they have to do and what they have to, what they have to go through, and they're not just focusing on, trying to decide which guy they want to be with. No, I have to protect my lover, and, and just and sometimes a lot of, I feel like sometimes the romance can take over the story, especially in young adult novels, young adult fantasy. So I think if you and even though it's a chunky book, it went by really fast, I think. And I hate to say it, but I mean, I feel kind of embarrassed to say, but I did like the large print. I think the large print was really nice and helpful. But yeah, it was such a fun story and a very unique fantasy, I think. Like compared to what I'm used to anyway. So that is The Absolute Book by Elizabeth Knox. I hope if you love fantasy, please check this one out. I think it's really unique and interesting world. So those are my thoughts on the absolute book. And I hope whatever you're reading, you're enjoying. And I will talk to you later. Bye.